If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The winter of 1944 came early to the steppe. By dawn, the Soviet airfield at Smolensk was buried under snow so thick it swallowed the sound of engines. The fog was dense enough to hide everything but the outlines of hangars and the faint red glow of a distant flare. Inside one of those hangars, the cold settled deep in the concrete, in the metal frames, in the bones of the people who worked there. Captain Andrei Volkov stood by the tail of a grounded yak, his gloved hands trembling slightly as he held a wrench. The limp in his left leg made him slow, careful, deliberate, a constant reminder of what he had lost. Once, he was known as a daring pilot, the kind who could outfly death in a dogfight. Now he was grounded, ordered to assist the maintenance crews instead of taking to the skies. He didn't argue when the order came. He just nodded, accepted the wrench, and went to work. Pride had left him months ago, when his squadron was torn apart above Kursk and his plane went down in flames. He crawled out of that wreck with a shattered knee and the smell of burning fuel in his lungs. Since then, he hadn't flown again. The hangar lights flickered as the generator coughed in the corner. Mechanics moved like shadows, their breath fogging in the cold air. The men were exhausted and afraid. Rumors said the Germans had regrouped to the west. They knew another raid was coming. Every day, the FW-190 struck low and fast, and each time the field looked a little more like a graveyard. That morning, a new figure appeared among the crew, a woman in a heavy coat, her cap pulled low, her boots stiff with frost. She introduced herself quietly as Anna Michailova, a war nurse reassigned after her field hospital was destroyed in an airstrike. She spoke little, only what was necessary. Her hands were steady as she unpacked a crate of tools and checked the pressure valves of a compressor. At first, the men stared. A woman among mechanics was rare, but she didn't seem to notice. She worked like someone who had long stopped caring what others thought, her focus absolute. Andrei watched her for a while from across the hangar. She moved with purpose, but there was a quiet tension in her face, a kind of fatigue that came from seeing too much. He recognized it instantly. He had worn the same expression once, after Kursk. By midday, the snow thickened. A siren wailed in the distance, not for an attack, but a test signal. Still, everyone tensed. Anna froze, her hand still gripping a wrench, before realizing it was false alarm. Andrei noticed the way her shoulders dropped, the slow breath she let out. He understood. Every sound out here carried the possibility of death. Later, while refueling lines were checked, Andrei limped toward her station. "You were a nurse?" he asked, his voice low, rough from the cold. She looked up, her eyes gray and sharp. "Until they bombed us out. There's no one left to heal now. Only machines." Her tone was matter of fact, not bitter. He respected that. He nodded toward the compressor. "You handle it like a pilot." She gave a faint smile. "I'll learn to work fast. When you don't, people die." Their conversation ended there. Words were heavy currency here, used only when necessary. Still, something changed in that moment. She had seen through his silence. He had seen through her composure. Two people stripped of everything except the work in front of them. That night, the fog rolled thicker. The hangar doors groaned in the wind. Andrei stayed behind after the others left, adjusting a bent aileron on one of the damaged fighters. His hands hurt from the cold. He could hear distant explosions across the valley, artillery flashes behind the cloud cover. Somewhere out there, others were flying, fighting, dying. He stared at the half-finished yak, and felt a familiar ache. Not pain, but the weight of being useless. He wanted to fly again. Not for glory, not for medals, just to matter again. But his knees stiffened every time he tried to climb a ladder, and command had already signed him off the roster. He turned off the lamp, the hangar falling into shadow. Outside, Anna crossed the runway with a lantern. Her breath was visible in the wind, her steps deliberate. She glanced at him through the open hangar door. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. the silence of people who understood loss too well to need words. He nodded once, acknowledging her presence. She nodded back and disappeared into the storm. Inside the hangar, Andre sat on the wing of the Yak-9, the wrench still in his hand. He looked toward the open sky, invisible behind the fog, and tried to remember what it felt like to believe in victory. But all he could think of were the faces of the men who had once flown beside him. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, deciding, without even realizing it, that if the chance ever came again, he wouldn't hesitate. Not this time. Outside, the distant sound of engines echoed faintly across the frozen airfield. German or Soviet, no one could tell. But both Andre and Anna heard it, and both felt the same cold knot of fear in their stomachs. It was a sound that meant the war hadn't finished with them yet. The storm did not stop for 3 days. The airfield became a maze of snowdrifts, the winds howling across the open steppe like artillery. Inside the hangar, the temperature dropped so low that oil froze in its cans and tools stuck to bare skin. The men worked in silence, their faces pale and hollow. Most of the pilots had been sent away to other sectors, and only a handful of engineers remained to keep what was left of the planes in working order. Andrei Volkov had begun repairing one of the few Yak-9s still capable of flight. His old aircraft, the same one he had once flown before it was torn apart by shrapnel. It was no longer on the roster, stripped for spare parts, the fuselage dented, the wing ribs buckled. But he had quietly started working on it anyway, night after night, long after everyone else left. He never told anyone why. Anna noticed before anyone else did. She found him there one night, half bent over the engine, his breath forming clouds under the flickering lamp. His gloves were off, his hands blackened by grease. He didn't hear her approach until she set down a cup of hot tea beside him. "You'll freeze working like that," she said softly. He straightened, stretching his bad leg with a quiet grunt. "It keeps the pain away," he replied, his voice flat but honest. "Your knee." He nodded once. "It never healed right. They said it was a miracle I could walk." Anna's eyes followed the uneven movement of his leg. "Then why fix this one? It won't fly again." He looked at the plane for a long moment before answering. "It's the only one that ever brought me home." That answer stayed with her. She didn't ask again. Instead, she began helping, not because she was ordered to, but because she saw what he was trying to do. She rewired the control systems, cleaned the carburetor, and rerouted the oil lines. Her background as a nurse made her precise and calm. She worked on machines the way she had once treated wounds, gently, with purpose. In the evenings, they shared brief conversations that filled the silence just enough. Andre told her about his old squadron, 12 men, all gone. He remembered their faces, but not their last words. Anna told him about her hospital, how she had carried wounded soldiers on a sled through the snow when the bombs fell. When she said she had stopped counting the dead, her voice didn't tremble. The hangar became their small world, a place where wars still echoed outside, but inside there was order. She cooked thin soup over a small heater. He worked until the tools slipped from his cold fingers. When the generator failed, she would light a lantern and hold it steady so he could see. At first, it was just work. Then it became something else, a quiet rhythm they both needed to keep from falling apart. Late one night, a transport truck arrived from command headquarters. The officer who stepped out carried a sealed dispatch. He spoke quickly, his tone clipped and nervous. The Germans were preparing another raid. The next one would be larger. They were ordered to evacuate all medical and non-combat personnel within 48 hours. Anna folded the paper carefully. "So we're leaving?" "Not yet," Andre said. "We still have planes to repair." "You mean your plane?" He didn't deny it. That night, Anna found him sitting by the open hangar doors, staring out at the faint red glow on the horizon, a German artillery barrage somewhere beyond the hills. The sound came seconds later, dull and heavy. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "When was the last time you slept?" "Before Kursk," he muttered. She studied his face, the lines under his eyes, the stillness in his expression. There was something deeply human in his exhaustion. Not weakness, but surrender to reality. "Why did you come back to the front?" she asked. "You could have stayed in the hospital." Anna turned her gaze toward the snow. Because someone has to fix what's left. And you. He hesitated. Because someone has to keep them flying. A gust of wind swept through the hangar, scattering papers and dust. She closed the doors halfway, leaving only a narrow slit where the outside light filtered through. The two of them stood there for a while, silent. In that silence, both were thinking the same thing, that when the next attack came, there would be no one left to stop it. When Andre returned to his plane, he noticed Anna had written a note in grease pencil on the side of the fuselage. "Do not give up on this one." He traced the words with his hand, his gloves smudging the letters. It wasn't a promise, just a reminder that someone else believed in him when he no longer did. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The airfield lay quiet under a pale moonlight, the outlines of the damaged planes barely visible through the frost. In the distance, faint lights blinked, maybe friendly, maybe not. Andre knew that before long, those lights would grow closer. He didn't know if he would fly again, but as he looked at the plane, he made a small decision. If the chance came, he wouldn't stay on the ground. The night stretched on, and the hangar filled with the soft sound of metal being tightened, fuel lines sealed, and a woman's quiet breath beside him. Two people trying, against every reason, to bring one broken machine, and perhaps themselves, back to life. The morning after the storm broke, the sky was a dull gray sheet, flat and endless. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold bit harder, creeping through the hangar walls and into the skin. Andrei Volkov was already awake before dawn, standing beside the yak. 9, his hand on the wing, as if checking the pulse of something fragile. The repairs were nearly done. Not perfect, not safe, but close enough to fly once, maybe twice. He knew it wasn't approved for combat, but no one was coming to inspect anymore. The command structure at the airfield had thinned to almost nothing. Anna arrived carrying a metal kettle of boiled water and bread wrapped in cloth. Her breath came out in steady clouds. She looked around at the empty hangar. 3 other planes stood gutted and motionless, their pilots evacuated or dead. The only sound was the hum of the small generator. "They won't send replacements," she said quietly. "The headquarters confirmed it last night. The supply lines cut." Andre nodded without looking at her. "Then we're on our own." She placed the kettle on a crate, watching him examine the engine once more. The light from the lamp cut sharp shadows across his face, emphasizing the tension in his jaw. He had not slept again, that much was clear. His hands moved with precision, but there was a heaviness to his motions, like a man preparing for something inevitable. After a long silence, she asked the question that had lingered since she met him. "What really happened to your squadron, Andre?" He froze for a moment, the wrench in his hand. Then he tightened a bolt, finished the motion, and spoke without looking up. "We were ordered to intercept a formation of bombers near Kursk. 12 of us went up. The Germans sent fighters ahead, FW-190s. We didn't see them until it was too late. I lost everyone in minutes. My radio failed, my left wing took fire, and I had to crash land. When I got back, command said I should be grateful to be alive." He exhaled sharply, resting his hand on the side of the cockpit. "I wasn't." Anna studied him quietly. The calm in his voice wasn't detachment. It was exhaustion carved deep into his mind. She understood that feeling all too well. She had watched people die and kept working, not because she was brave, but because stopping would mean facing the memories. The sound of a vehicle engine interrupted the silence. A truck roared into the yard, wheels grinding over ice. A junior officer jumped down, his coat unbuttoned, face pale. He sprinted across the snow, shouting before he reached the hangar. Enemy aircraft inbound. 16 Focke-Wulfs. Estimated arrival in 12 minutes. The hangar fell into chaos. Men grabbed rifles, tools, anything they could carry. The officer barked orders. The anti-air guns were frozen, the main runway blocked with debris. Command ordered an evacuation of non-essential personnel immediately. The trucks would leave in 10 minutes. Anna's heart pounded as she looked at Andre. He was staring at the sky beyond the hangar doors, a flat horizon turning darker by the minute. She saw the realization hit him, quiet and certain. There were no pilots left to defend the base. The few who remained were wounded or gone. "You can't," she said before he spoke. He turned toward the yak 9. "It's ready." "It's not ready," she snapped, stepping in front of him. "The fuel line still leaks, and the left stabilizer's cracked. You won't last 10 minutes out there." He met her eyes calmly. "Then I'll make those 10 minutes count." For a second, she didn't move. The hangar's noise faded behind them. The shouts, the clatter of tools, the distant wail of sirens. All she could hear was the sound of his breathing and the faint creak of the yak's frame in the cold. "You'll die up there," she whispered. He didn't argue. He simply pulled on his gloves, tightened his jacket, and limped toward the plane. His expression wasn't fearless. It was something harder. Acceptance. When he reached the cockpit, he paused and turned back. Anna was still standing there, frozen between wanting to stop him and knowing she couldn't. He held out his hand for a moment, then reached into his coat and handed her the faded scarf she had once used to wrap his burned hand. "Keep this," he said. His tone was firm, but his eyes softened. "If they ask, tell them I chose it." She shook her head, unable to speak. He climbed into the cockpit with effort, his bad leg dragging slightly as he pulled himself in. She moved closer, pressing her hand to the glass canopy as frost formed between them. Their eyes met through the thin layer of ice. No words, no promises, just understanding. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught with a roar that filled the hangar. Snow swirled up as the propeller spun to life. Mechanics shouted and scrambled out of the way. Anna stood still, the scarf clutched in her hand, her pulse pounding in her ears. Through the canopy, she saw him look once more in her direction, not as a farewell, but as acknowledgement. The man who had spent months trying to avoid the sky was finally choosing it again, even if it meant the end. As he taxied onto the runway, the fog thickened around the airfield. The roar of his yak 9 cut through the wind, steady and deliberate. Anna stepped outside, the cold burning her face, and watched as he accelerated down the icy strip and lifted into the gray sky. The German planes were already faint dots on the horizon, descending fast. The Soviet anti-air guns failed to fire, the mechanisms jammed with frost. She could see the formation clearly now, black shapes cutting through the cloud line. Andrei's plane was alone. Inside the hangar, the radio crackled to life. Voices shouted coordinates, reports of visual contact. Anna stood beside it, her eyes fixed upward, the scarf still in her hands. When the first explosions sounded in the distance, she didn't flinch. She just whispered quietly, almost to herself, "Come back." But she already knew he wouldn't. Outside, the wind carried the echo of engines and gunfire across the frozen airfield. The battle had begun, and one man was flying against 16. The moment Andrei's yak 9 vanished into the gray, the airfield fell into a tense, unnatural stillness. The only movement came from the snow swirling in the downwash of his takeoff. Anna stood outside the hangar with the scarf clenched in her gloved hand, her breath sharp in the frozen air. Behind her, mechanics and officers shouted into radios, but the static drowned everything. The anti-air batteries remained dead, their gears frozen solid. Every man knew what Andrei had done. He had gone up alone against 16 German fighters in a half-repaired plane with leaking fuel and jammed guns. Through the hangar's small radio, bursts of transmission came in. Short, chaotic, half swallowed by interference. Enemy formation. Altitude 2,000 meters. Yak 9-sided, single aircraft engaging. Anna leaned closer, her heart pounding in her chest. Each word felt like a pulse of fear. She tried to picture the sky above the clouds, to imagine what he was seeing, what he was feeling, as he faced a swarm of black crosses cutting through the winter light. Up there, the world was nothing but motion and noise. Andrei gripped the stick, every muscle in his left leg screaming as he forced the yak into a climb. The controls shuddered under strain, but the engine held, barely. The first FW-190 came into sight, diving from above. He rolled hard, the wing clipping a trail of smoke, the force pulling against his bad knee until he nearly blacked out. His guns fired once, then jammed. A warning light flickered on the panel. He didn't curse. He didn't panic. He simply adjusted. Years of combat had burned hesitation out of him. He dropped altitude suddenly, diving through cloud cover, forcing the Germans to follow. The fog became his ally, a dense curtain where visibility vanished. He used it the way he once used terrain, as a trap, on the ground. The men stared upward, hearing only the distant rumble of engines and the thunder of cannon fire. Anna refused to move from her place by the runway. She could feel the tremors through the earth each time a plane went down, though she couldn't tell which side it belonged to. Then came the reports, one enemy down, then another. The radio operator repeated them, his voice unsteady. FW-190 destroyed by collision, another down. Yak still airborne. No one believed it. A damaged plane should have disintegrated after the first hit. But Andre was flying as though he had nothing left to lose. And perhaps that was true. In the air, he pulled maneuvers that made no tactical sense. He charged head-on into a cluster of FW-190s, forcing them to scatter, then flipped his Yak upside down and clipped one's wingtip with his landing gear. The impact tore metal from both planes. His own wings shuddered violently. He leveled out inches above the snow, using the ground as cover, then looped back into the cloud layer. The cockpit reeked of smoke and burning oil. He could barely see through the cracked canopy, but he flew by instinct, by memory, by the feel of wind against the fuselage. Anna pressed her hand to the radio, listening to the chaos unfold. She remembered his words, "I'll make those 10 minutes count." It had only been 4. The operator called out another count. 4 FW-190s destroyed. No visual on the Yak. Every second felt stretched. The sound of explosions rolled closer to the airfield. Through the haze, faint black dots began to fall, pieces of aircraft spiraling down. The men ran to the edge of the runway, trying to identify them. Anna didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the clouds, searching for the glint of his wings. Above, Andre's world was narrowing. The instrument dials flickered. His engine temperature spiked. He had no ammunition left, his guns empty, his hydraulics failing. He used the Yak itself as a weapon, diving into formations, clipping wings, forcing collisions. Each time he rammed an enemy, he pulled out seconds before impact or spiraled away through smoke. The 9th kill came when he feigned a stall, drawing 2 Germans into firing range of each other. The explosion lit the sky with orange fire that flickered across the frozen landscape below. By the 8th minute, the Yak was barely holding together. Flames licked the left side of the fuselage. The cabin was hot, suffocating, filled with the stench of burning fuel. Andre coughed, vision blurring from the smoke. The radio hissed, a broken voice cutting through. Yak. 9 still engaging, 7 enemy remaining. He saw the final cluster of FW-190s diving toward the airfield, their gunfire flashing in the distance. He knew if they reached the ground, everyone below would die. There was one move left, one he had never used. He throttled forward, locking the stick, and aimed directly for the lead fighter. The Yak's engine screamed as the altimeter needle dropped. From the ground, the last moments played out like a single, silent film reel. The gray clouds tore open. A burning Yak, 9 shot downward at full speed, a streak of fire cutting through the sky, colliding head-on with the leading German plane. The explosion was massive, a sudden flash that lit the fog from within, followed by fragments raining down like molten snow. The remaining enemy fighters broke formation and fled west, their attack broken. The airfield fell silent again, except for the faint echo of engines disappearing into the distance. Anna stood there, motionless, the heat of the explosion still visible in the sky. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. The radio operator spoke again, his voice shaking. Enemy retreat confirmed, 16 confirmed downed. Yak 9, no signal. The scarf in her hand slipped to the ground. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stood in the cold, watching the last traces of smoke fade into the horizon. Somewhere out there, among the wreckage, was the man who had once said he'd make 10 minutes matter. He had made 9, and it was enough. When the last sound of engines faded, The airfield stood in a silence that felt unreal. Smoke still drifted low over the snow, curling around the broken silhouettes of hangars and grounded planes. The light was dim, the kind of pale, blue-gray dawn that erased shadows. Men began to emerge from shelters and trenches, dazed, blinking into the stillness. No one spoke at first. They all listened for something, for another air raid, for the crack of artillery, but nothing came. The storm, the noise, the fear, all gone in an instant. Anna walked forward slowly, her boots crunching over ice and metal fragments. The scarf she had clutched during the attack hung loosely around her wrist now, streaked with soot. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts, but she kept moving toward the open field beyond the runway. She didn't need to be told what had happened. She had seen the final explosion, the way the Yak-9 disappeared in a fire. Still, part of her refused to accept it until she found the wreck herself. The snow stretched out for hundreds of meters, broken by craters and burning debris. Wrecked German fighters were scattered across the perimeter, their black crosses half buried under frost. The men who followed her stopped to inspect each one, counting them, marking coordinates. 16, just as the report said. But she kept walking further than the others, toward the dark patch of smoke rising near the tree line. There, among the twisted remains of metal and scorched snow, she found what she was looking for. The Yak-9 was barely recognizable, its wings torn, its nose buried deep in a shallow crater. The engine was still hot, hissing where snow touched it. She knelt beside the wreckage, brushing away the ice and soot with her gloves. Her breath shook as she searched the cockpit area, though she already knew there would be nothing to find. And then, half buried in the snow near the melted canopy, she saw it. His flight badge, its metal warped from heat, the red enamel cracked, but still intact. She picked it up carefully. It was warm, as if holding the last trace of him. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she just sat there for a while, her eyes on the horizon, listening to the wind. Behind her, soldiers began clearing the field. One of the younger mechanics approached, his face pale, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, they said you were the one helping him fix this plane." She looked at him briefly, then back at the badge in her hand. "Yes, they're saying he saved the base. Without him, the bombers would have wiped us out." She didn't answer. The words were true, but they didn't make the silence any easier. She stood slowly, pocketed the badge, and walked back toward the hangar. The snow had begun to fall again, thin and quiet, covering the wrecks as if the earth itself was trying to forget. Days passed. The Germans didn't return. The airfield was reinforced, repaired, brought back to life piece by piece. New pilots arrived, young, eager, unaware of what had happened there. Anna stayed. She asked to remain as part of the maintenance crew. Command approved it. No one questioned her reason. She took over the same hangar where Andre had worked. The smell of oil and smoke lingered. Every morning, she started the generator herself, checked the tools, and wrote names of repaired planes on a chalkboard near the door. There was always work to do, and in war, work meant survival. Sometimes, when the wind was quiet, she thought she could still hear the echo of his engine, that familiar low growl rising into the sky. She would pause, glance at the empty runway, and remind herself it was only the sound of trucks or distant artillery. Yet the feeling stayed. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something steadier, the knowledge that he had done what he set out to do. Weeks later, a new unit of pilots prepared for their first mission from the rebuilt base. Anna watched from the hangar doorway as they taxied out, their planes lined up under the pale winter sun. The snow had melted in patches, revealing the dark soil beneath. She wore the same coat she had during the attack, but now a thin wire bracelet hung from her wrist. Wrapped around it, Andre's flight badge, polished clean. As the first plane lifted off, she felt a quiet calm settle over her. For the first time since the hospital bombing, she believed the war might one day end, not because of orders or victories, but because people like Andre had made sure others could live to see it. She looked up at the sky, now clear and wide. The clouds were gone, replaced by an open stretch of blue. A single contrail crossed it slowly, fading into light. Her eyes followed it until it disappeared, and a faint smile touched her face, not of joy, but of peace. The hangar doors closed behind her as the sound of engines faded into the distance. The scarf she had once given him still hung by the workbench, untouched. She left it there, a quiet memory of the man who had chosen to fly when no one else could. The war would move on, the world would forget his name, but not this place. For those who were there, for those who lived because of him, Andrei Volkov wasn't a ghost. He was the reason the airfield still stood, the reason they could keep fighting and one day stop. And as the snow began to fall again, light and slow, it covered the runway in silence, the same silence he had left behind, calm, final, and free.